Who was your worst teacher? College professor who didn't respond to any questions and just gave a final grade. It was an online class without lecture too. Unlike other professors who would post mini lectures or videos or whatever, it was a very here's the book, do your entire marketing campaign on this. One student called and messaged him 9 times to get a grade from our midterm, something none of the rest of us got. He finally sent her an email with nothing but a bunch of white space and a 1-letter reply of her grade. He gave me a B for the course. He gave the chronic C student that I tutored an A. I'm pretty sure he just randomly assigned grades. It was an awful experience overall. Dang. After reading all these, I am so lucky blessed that my college professors care so much about the material that they can't shut up about it. If I had to do it all on my own I would fail. Hands down. Good luck. College professor that made his students group up and teach the material to the rest of the class while he sat in the back of the room and just watched. Then he gave the exams that came from the book publisher, had us correct each other's tests, and called it done. He didn't think but show up. I learned nothing. I had a history teacher in 10th grade who just sat and drank coffee. You had to read from the book and do outlines of it. He never read your work. I used to just put gibberish in there and see what happened. One time he wrote good job about an inch away from the comment in my outline I like cheese. I somehow got a B. Still don't understand that one. I think almost everyone got a B. I wonder if the coffee was a vehicle for something else. My Spanish teacher that was Puerto Rican. She insisted that the correct way of pronouncing Spanish words was the Puerto Rican way. She was wrong about many things. Also insisted that numbers had plural like 4 sisters would be cuatres hermanas. Wrong, instead of cuatro hermanas. Correct. She shouldn't be a teacher. Mrs. Dana in the 3rd grade. She was a terrible teacher in general. She talked about her migraines constantly instead of teaching and explained how chocolate and Taco Bell triggered her migraines and explosive diarrhea and told us that anyone who drinks diet soda would immediately get cancer even if they drank it, because they have diabetes and can't drink regular soda. She picked on different students, was vaguely racist, and loved to have loud, patronizing conversations with her teacher friend next door about students in her class as a passive-aggressive way to get onto students. She was particularly mean to me because she wasn't from what would be considered a good family in the area but married well. In her new social circle, she wound up rubbing elbows with my grandmother, who absolutely despised Mrs. Dana and was not shy about making that fact known. So when she saw my last name on the first day of class, she decided to get her revenge. It all culminated in one incident in which I had an altercation with a boy outside of school hours and not at a school event. On the Monday following the event, Mrs. Dana and her teacher friend pulled me into the hallway and said things like looks like the Pandersons aren't as wonderful as they pretend and how ashamed your grandmother must be and other things that turned poor, sensitive Dan Panderson into a mess. I went home and my tears turned my mother into a bear ready to attack. The following day, my mother put on her best suit, donned her pearls, and pulled her hair into an elegant chignon and stomped her high-heeled feet into that school at 3 p.m. and stepped into the classroom. Mrs. Dana said hello mom first name. My mother said, oh, you may call me Mrs. last name. My friends used my first name and then laid the most gloriously condescending smackdown on that B that the world has ever heard. Eventually the principal came down and Mama said, well, I've said my piece. Mrs. Dana will finish the year being much nicer to Dan or I will be forced to have a meeting with my cousin, the school board president, and see how he feels about renewing her contract. Mama flounced out leaving shattered remains in her wake and it was honestly amazing. Mama, being a grade AB, proceeded to sign up to make all the baked goods for class and only made chocolate because Mrs. Dana can't have chocolate. God, I miss my mom. And frick you Pat Dana. Oh my god, your mama was awesome. Wherever she is now, she is definitely ruling it like the boss butt queen she is. Also, Pat Dana needs to burn in a ditch. Gunnar, gym teacher, old white dude with a grey fro. He wore very short shorts and sometimes his testicles fell out. College professor, using that term loosely, he gave tests over the material, then actually went over it the next week. Mrs. Hazlitt, had her in 5th grade and she was extremely rude to most of the class. I was bullied a lot during elementary school and I would always come to the teacher and my parents for help. She would never do anything about it at all and would sometimes just get me in trouble for asking her about it. So one day I get beat up by some kids outside because they were trying to take a kickball that I brought from home. So I was covered in dirt and extremely upset and she comes over to them. I thought that this was finally when she would just them for something. Nope. She screams in my face and tells me to not tell my parents about this. Went home and told my dad about it and he talks to the principal about the situation and is furious. She was removed for a week in class and we had a sub. She came back and never paid much attention to me after that. What a bee. Ms. Morales. We had a girl with a bunch of health issues and allergies in our class, including latex. And one day she chose to let her favorite student hold a birthday party in our class with latex balloons everywhere. Girl, who was in a wheelchair, gets to class and immediately has breathing problems and starts breaking out. She asked the teacher if she could go to the nurse, and this bee had the audacity to say just tough it out until next period. I'm not letting you go to the nurse yet. Luckily, our Tay saw the girl and convinced Ms. Morales to let her go, but the girl wheeled to the nurse, which was at the other side of the school, by herself because the teacher wouldn't let anyone else go. Girl got an EpiPen shot and was okay, but it still pisses me off 4 years later. What the frick? I'll call her Mrs. R from here on out. She was one of my teachers in 8th grade. A little background info. I was bullied horrendously growing up. In middle school, there was a kid named C who was the ringleader of bullies. He was the worst one. Well, in Mrs. R's class, she stepped out for a second and C decided that was the perfect time to chase me with a pair of scissors in an attempt to cut my hair. I grew tired of it, stood up, and screamed my head off. Mrs. R comes in and I thought he was going to get in trouble. 3 days later, my mom and I get called into the principal's office. Mrs. R had sent a disciplinary report to the principal requesting I get suspended from school for disrupting her class and the special education class next door. My mom threatened to press charges against the school and C for assaulting me. My nana, who decided to see how bad things were for herself, tagged along and popped off asking if Mrs. R was sleeping with C's dad because in what universe is allowing someone to attack another child not disruptive? From that point on, Mrs. R tried daily to fail me on her class and get me either suspended or expelled. We had homework, mine would go straight to the garbage can and a note would get sent home claiming I never turned it in. Tests, didn't matter how well I did, I'd always fail. Group projects, everyone else in my group would get A's and I'd get a C because I didn't do any of the work, even though I was the only one who did the work on one project. And C? She allowed him to be as brutal to me as he wanted. I barely passed her class with a C at the end of the year. I bawled like a dang baby. Your granny was onto something. I guess that's why Mrs. A didn't like it. The one math teacher sucks at math. Taught me the wrong methods to approach problems. Generally inept. Got 27 marks in my finals and told me that I deserved it. Our whole class got an average of 38/100. I am surprised that she is still teaching math till this day. I had a physics teacher that couldn't do basic math or follow a formula. I think there must not have been another candidate for the job. Junior year English. Our teacher was pregnant most of the year and had ridiculous mood swings. Around 3/4 of the class failed that course, and it was AP English. My English teacher in sophomore year left because her baby was due. We had a replacement teacher for most of the year, but she ended up getting pregnant and leaving before the year ended. Our original teacher then came back and finished the semester with us. We did absolutely nothing in that class. Got a B though. I had a professor who had a goal of failing 50% of the class by midterms, drop out of the class, and failing 50% of the remaining people at finals. I squeezed by with a D and retook the class a few years later since I don't think a D would let me graduate, but did let me progress. I have a professor who keeps bragging about how many people fail her classes each year, and as it turns out she is one narcissistic psycho B. Had a teacher in my first semester of college in an intro to Linux class that was pretty terrible at teaching us anything about Linux for a few reasons. 1. She had not used Linux in over 10 years. 2. She had been assigned this class 2 days before classes started because the original teacher got caught sleeping with a student a few weeks prior. 3. She barely spoke English. Her lectures consisted of her going through the PowerPoints that the previous teacher had set up for the last semester, reading some of them word for word, and just flipping through the rest wordlessly. Then she'd have us do an activity from the workbook and would be of no help to anyone who got stuck. Me and a few of the other students who had a very basic understanding of Linux ended up organizing study groups, and basically the class had to self-teach in order for us to pass. My 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Chamberlain. She would always say I counted like a little kindergartner when I'd use my fingers and the other kids would laugh, and I had to hide my hands in my desk to do math. Like I'm 22 and still use my fingers to count on hasn't hurt me in life at all. Until you try to figure out the area of a circle. I still count on my fingers too. I think it's perfectly normal. It wasn't just worst teacher, it was the worst class. There is no class where I actually learned less, and easily could have learned more on my own with little or no effort, than geography. I swear to God most of the time it was just an hour of sit down and shut up class. I mean sure, it did have a lot of classes with Avenue, but seriously, how many films can you watch about western provinces producing wheat? Because there's a shitload of those and they're all boring as heck. And also 40 years out of date because Alberta is focusing on oil production, which never gets a mention. The biggest shame is it could have been a really interesting class if they just put the tiniest amount of effort into it. But they didn't. I remember a great deal of classes was just us copying stuff off the board. Couldn't you just Xerox this crap and ask us to read it? Funny, my worst class was also a Canadian geography one. The worst part was when a group of kids figured that it'd be funny to throw batteries across the room during every class. 9th grade English teacher. She sincerely believed that I didn't speak English. I don't know where she got this idea, other than I am Spanish-English bilingual. The first time she took attendance, day 1, she asked, "Oh, Minafall 27, I heard you speak Spanish. Do you speak English?" She would noticeably slow down to talk to me and made comments several times about my not understanding something because English is my second language. My English is better than my Spanish nowadays. They were probably about even back then. Meanwhile, at least 3-4 students would copy my homework. It's fine for a teacher to do these things if the student does need the extra help, if their English is indeed weaker than their native language. But that just wasn't the case for me. A college networking teacher who went from working with monkeys to trying to teach humans. Didn't go well when the whole class, even the smart kids in class, failed that semester. High school French teacher. She never actually taught, she just rattled off random things in French without teaching us the French in between long-winded stories about her kids. My high school electronics teacher was the single most important teacher I've had. He taught me so much but was unhealthy. He had a heart attack and his class was taken over by another teacher for the semester. The new guy didn't think an intro class should cover that much, so I, being the TA for that class, had nothing to do but organize the storeroom, which was incredibly easy now that it wasn't being used. Anyways, usually on the end of the first week kids would be making blinking stuff and using oscilloscopes, power supplies, and signal generators after learning how to use them. He taught how to read the tools first, then how they were used, then what it meant, so that the kids would be comfortable using them to verify their amplifiers worked, etc. Also, it helped them jump right in and start using cool stuff before the realization this was a math class set in when they had to make their own circuits to fit his requirements. But the new guy thought that making amplifiers and custom circuits would be too hard for kids, despite the old teacher having done this class for decades. So the first week was spent watching videos of Nova and other programs about electricity and stuff. At the end of a semester they put together basic light switches that powered LEDs. I remember the midterm test for my original teacher in his electronics I class was like, make me an amplifier that runs off 7 volt and amplifies a 100 Hz signal 200 times and will not amplify anything in these ranges. Then we designed something on paper and built it before the end of class. We would then leave the breadboard on our paper design, and that was the test. Then more tests later and different classes would just keep adding stuff on, such as power requirements or whatever topics we had covered, but was always build this, and sometimes it was a multi-day test where we would design for 2 to 3 days and then build and test. But the news guy's test was something like, what is a resistor? What is an LED? Match the word to the picture and showed like a TV, a radio, and steam kettle. It still makes me mad how little effort he put into the class. You go from building the cool stuff to building something I made in 5th grade is what makes me feel bad for you, but I would love to watch Nova all day. I had a Haitian math teacher. She was well over 400 pounds. She would heavy breathe just moving an arm. That wasn't the issue though. She hated me. I'd be last leaving after the bell so that I could ask her questions. She would always reply, get here early in the morning and I will tutor you. I drive to school an hour early, sit in her class waiting on her, and she'd never show up. It happened about 3 times before I stayed after the bell again and asked why. She barely got up out of her seat. Took 2 minutes to get to me, holding on to anything I could to support herself. She started stroking my hair and said, "Oh, you're so beautiful, but it's a shame you're so dumb." The next day we had the board coming to watch over classes. She hurried and put a big huge piece of cardboard around me. When they were coming down the hall, I was in the middle of copying notes from the projector. I knocked it off while they were by the door, and they asked why I was behind there. She was so angry. She died a year later from a massive heart attack. I've had 2 teachers who were so bad they got fired. My grade 2 teacher just straight up didn't show up for class most of the time, leaving substitutes to make up a lesson plan on the spot for an entire year. My junior kindergarten teacher was racist enough that the school fired her. Most kids were either immigrants or first generation Canadians and or weren't white. She handled this by getting mad at 4-year-olds who just arrived in Canada 6 months ago when they couldn't speak English yet. If someone had a non-Anglo name, she would just straight up change it, rather than take the time to learn the correct pronunciation. She said racist crap to the white Canadian parents about the non-white and immigrant parents. Eventually, enough of the white Canadian parents complained and she was fired. Brampton. My 2nd grade teacher. She would scream in your face if you did anything remotely not up her standards. This led to me hating and fearing school so badly that I'd try not to go. I think I went less than 40 days to school for the entire school year. I still hated the idea of school up to the last year of school. 4th grade, Mr. Perisony used to hit kids with books, throw erasers. One kid got pegged in the eye and had to go to the ER after school for an infection and wore a patch for a week or so. Flip desks, etc. I had recently moved to the area. I was completely shocked even being 7 years old. This was the 80s. My mother was a 27-year-old single parent in a pretty conservative area, and god dang if she didn't step up and say this is wrong. And had an entire group of parents dismissing her because that's how he got through to kids and had since the 60s. It being that time period, he was able to quietly retire the next freaking year. So he still taught another round of kids. Hindsight, I respect the absolute frick out of my mom for standing up for what was right in that environment. My 11th grade math teacher. She wouldn't let you pass unless you could complete a multiplication table worksheet under a very small amount of time. I could do the worksheet, but not in the time she gave. I could also solve the more advanced problems from class. I just don't fill out worksheets quickly. I was detained during lunch so many days trying to pass that stupid quiz. She finally gave me a C because I think she realized it just wasn't going to happen. Mr. O freaking Breen. Chemistry teacher 1996. Spent ages on chemistry coursework. Was awarded spiffingly great predicted grades and informed I didn't need to do any more work on it. Actual grades came in not so spiffingly great. Told him what a liar he was in front of class. Awarded a big detention. Given lines. Instead wrote a 2-page document detailing what a lying bastard he was. Grades were overturned not long after to spiffingly great again. Fucked it. LOL, I have a Mr. O'Brien for a social studies class and he's pretty cool. My math teacher was convinced my calculator was a laser pointer after a kid in the back was shining one on the whiteboard and yelled at me every day for it even after the kid stopped using the pointer. He also scolded me for always using the bathroom in the middle of class the first time I ever asked to be excused. Oh, and he told us all how he wished the classroom could double as a gas chamber to get rid of all the obnoxious kids in the school. He doesn't work there anymore. Oh, Mrs. O'Brien. This would never be acceptable in a classroom today, but I took Ritalin in grade school for ADHD, once in the morning and once in the middle of the day, administered by the school nurse. Whenever Mrs. O'Brien was irritated with me, she would yell, "Go take your meds," at me in front of the whole class. Yikes. This is the third O'Brien in this thread. They must be collectively sucky. 9th grade science. She hated me, and, while I gave her good reason, looking back on it now, the way she handled it was completely inappropriate. She would gossip about me and my friends at lunch when everyone would be in her room is the main thing. She also brought down my mark at every opportunity. The example I remember is when I handed in a checkpoint for a big project a day or two late and she docked me 10%. This would have been fine, but one of her favorites didn't do any of her project until the night before it was due and she got a 95%. On an overnight field trip she moved my cot closer to the girl I was dating, then started making comments to other students about how close our cots were. She's the only teacher in my entire life who I can honestly say that I like less now that I've graduated. I had a high school history teacher who basically got his job because the school wanted a basketball coach. No joke, he legit thought Columbus was from England. He also kept me after class to yell at me for about 10 minutes once because I suggested that dropping the atomic bombs on Japan was unnecessary. I was big into the people's history at the time. Nice guy. We had a math teacher who was basically hired to be the football coach. His manner of grading on a curve was to give us a test that was impossible to finish in time. So work as fast as possible, have the top score be 100%. After 3 of us got A's and the next highest was a D, he was demoted to study halls and replaced, but not fired completely because we still needed a football coach. I had a kindergarten teacher made us stay past dismissal time by a few hours. "No, you guys aren't going home yet," she said. I didn't see her after that, so she probably got fired. Had a teacher in high school, nasty old lady, hated kids. As a dumb prank, one guy stuck a piece of tape across the doorway when she stepped out. She walked back in, tape on her legs. Stupid joke, right? Wrong. She found out who did it and reported him to the police. Said he tried to kill her. No lie. Wanted him charged. 10th grade driver's education teacher. He would mock his students, and when he passed back tests, he would personally give students who earned A's on tests. He would throw the rest of the tests, B's and below, on the ground and wait for us to pick them up. Additionally, my 10th grade geometry teacher. He was judgmental, mean, and really had no business being a teacher. He would randomly ask specific students to write full proofs on the dry erase board and, in my opinion, chose students who were confused. I had a solid B in geometry, so I rarely was chosen, but loathed his teaching style, especially as a teacher now. For me it was my 6th grade math teacher. She had some issue with my father and took it out on me. Called me out in front of the class and called me stupid, or claimed that I didn't pay attention. She's the reason I still have some trouble with math to this day. I had 2 I didn't like for different reasons. Ms. was my high school math teacher. She had a thick accent and a bad habit of skipping steps. Every other sentence out of her mouth was "This is easy. Shut up, mom, it's the hardest math I've done at that point." Mr. was my high school social studies teacher. He among other things gave difficult in-class essays, in which I didn't get the assistance I was allowed, forced me to take another history class instead of government which I was interested in, and made my sister cry one day. Frick you sir, I got the highest grade in the territory for grade 12 social studies and couldn't be bothered to show up to the ceremony. I find particularly nasty teacher. I'll call her Mrs. K, but she was a nasty, hateful person. She would consistently bully children. This is primary school, so 5, 11-12-year-olds, and she mostly taught with the younger classes. She would pull kids up to the front and call them idiots, ask them to do whatever task it was they were worst at, was even known to reward children for bullying whoever it was from that year she picked. That's just the emotional side. She would drag kids about, exclude them from trips, and if any parent complained, then suddenly she would be seeing signs of abuse and report that parent to social services. Her sister being high up in the local social work office. She did this for years to me and many other kids, but knew the kids to be nice too. The ones with good parents, aka the well-off ones, and how to smear those who disliked her. She was a complete real-life equivalent of the Queen Bee stereotype bee from high school movies, but as a 50+ witch who just liked having power over people and loved to brag about having connections with people who count. The most satisfying moment I ever experienced around her was her insulting me at a well-regarded local restaurant bar, within earshot of my manger, who backed me up on serving her a lifetime ban in front of the entire school staff at their yearly Christmas party for drunken and abusive behavior. This was a particularly good revenge, as it served as both immediate revenge and blocked her from what was essentially the fanciest restaurant in town. If I heard she was dead, I would likely throw a party on her grave and dig it up to make sure the old hag was really gone. Maybe throw on some holy water and steak to be sure. If I heard she was dead, I would likely throw a party on her grave and dig it up to make sure the old hag was really gone. Maybe throw on some holy water and steak to be sure. That last part had me on the floor. I have forgotten her name. It was 50 years ago, but it was the new art teacher. Art was my favorite subject in grammar school and I was consistently top 3. Then the teacher left and all of a sudden I dropped to bottom 3. I was used to that as it was my usual position in almost all of the other subjects. What made it bad was that she let me know that she hated Jehovah's Witnesses, and I was the first child of that religion in that school and everybody knew. At the end of that school year we chose the subjects that we would continue to exam level and I dropped art. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.